Hello, we are going to get started right on time today. So welcome everybody who is attending. You are in the digital event for One Content Library, Any Platform. I am Sam Anderson and I will be your host for today. I'll give you a little bit of a breakdown of what's going to happen in the next hour. So that will start with some intros for the team that's here today, and then we'll dive into some of the aspects that are coming later. But first, I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your day to join us today. We are very happy to have you here. As I said earlier, I'm Sam Anderson. I'm Technical Marketing Consultant for ArchVision, also founder of Studio Ladder. I have a background at Epic Games and Shop Architects, so very well versed in the 3D world and needing to produce different deliverables. So we are also joined by Kelsey here. She is the moderator and she's going to be the go-to person for asking any questions. She'll make sure that she is getting all the questions that are in the chat and relaying them to us so that we can answer them and make sure we cover everything today. We also have Corey, who is CEO of ArchVision. Corey is going to be the person who is demonstrating all of the great content today. He is truly an expert on this stuff. He has been a part of this industry for years, and I really want you to take advantage of asking him many questions. I can easily say that we're all very passionate about helping artists improve their workflows. And so that's why we're here today. We want to make sure that we're getting the information out to you and helping you make your life a little bit easier from your day-to-day workflows. So with that, that's going to wrap up our little intro. Corey, feel free to add anything there if you want to, but we're going to dive into the demonstration next, and then we'll have a Q&A at the end. Now, we will also be peppering in some polls throughout. This is going to help us understand what programs you use most, and this will help dictate what educational content we continue to put out there for the world to see. So with that, I want to thank you once more. Feel free to add anything to the chat, add any questions to the Q&A. We will definitely be trying to make sure we cover all of your questions. And Corey, I will pass it off to you now.
Thank you, Sam. I appreciate it. Thank you all for coming. As Sam said, we're glad to have you all here, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and see what we're up to over here at ArchVision. ArchVision, just for those of you who don't know, we've been around since 1991. Started out in the biz industry, creating 3D assets, 3D content for photorealistic renderings and animations and things like that back in the day. And we really broke some new ground really early on in the whole CG industry, ArchViz industry, and we continue to do that today. We do that mostly through our RPC technology. We create a handful of different tools and as well as content that's very mature. It's a lot of our code has been around for a while, but these days we have about probably half of our code base and half of our technology has been made over the last 4 years. So we took what we were working on over the last decades and really started to build on top of it, and we'll start to see some of the fruit of that here today. RPCs, you take a model like this an architect might have in SketchUp, Rhino, Revit, you name it, and our RPC assets are 3D models that can be used to populate spaces. So all the trash cans and photocopiers and things like that in this image, and the chairs and furniture and pieces like that are all RPC assets. I won't dive into exactly the details of RPC. You can check out our first webinar that we did just a couple weeks ago for more information on more details on what makes an RPC up. But I did want to mention it today because we will talk about creating this RPC content as well as other pieces of content. I have to mention AVAIL. AVAIL is our sister company, and our content libraries all ship through AVAIL, but also some of the more current technologies that we're building are built and interoperable, if you will, and connected to AVAIL. So most of the presentation that I'll do today will be inside of AVAIL, showing content and concepts. And the real big kind of foundation that AVAIL provides for us is that it's a content manager. It can manage basically virtually any piece of content. It's very specialized, say specialized these days in the AEC world, especially in Revit, deep dive in Revit, but it can manage any piece of content, from texture files to materials to 3D meshes to RPCs, you name it, it can manage any piece of content. So I will now just jump right into a demo session, and I will hop right into AVAIL. And I'm looking at here AVAIL desktop, and what you're looking at are a handful of channels that are in AVAIL. And each one of these channels has various pieces of content in them and can be consumed and used in many different platforms. The channel that I'll dive into here today is our title of our webinar, One Content Library, Any Platform. I want to point out before I dive into the actual models and assets portion of the discussion, I want to point out that the structure of this channel a little bit, so you all understand what's so powerful about AVAIL and why ArchVision has chosen to build on top of it. This screen here, I'm inside the channel, and in this channel, you can see I have several different file extensions that are sitting inside this channel, from SketchUp file to PNG and even URLs. There's structured data on top of all this, so you can see there are tags and keywords in here. This content, I can add more metadata on top of all this content as needed. But some of these tags have actually come in from content that I've indexed in. And I'll point out this RPC here as an example. If I click on this RPC, well, there are a handful of RPCs. I'm going to filter by RPC here. And you'll see there's metadata that's coming in here for keywords and activity and ethnicity and so on. These tags are actually derived from the published asset. So when we go to create an RPC, we put in the metadata, and the metadata comes along for the ride, and it's all visible here inside of AVAIL. So what this allows us to do is create these channels of content, and it really doesn't matter what file format I have in here. I can easily click on these tags as an example and start to filter and sort through my content here, and begin to consume that content. All right. I'll point out, for instance, file like SketchUp as an example. Here's a SketchUp file. Here's a Revit file that's sitting here. If I take my SketchUp file and double click that, that will open up SketchUp, and I'll be able to, well, should open up SketchUp. Let me just log in here really quickly.
While you're doing that, I do want to note that we have this poll that just popped up. So if you weren't here in the first few moments, I mentioned that we will be peppering some polls here. So this is just for us to have some better understanding of what creators are using these days. So this one is talking about the 3D models that you prefer to use. And I know that we're talking about RPCs today, and Corey just showed that filtering aspect. And as an artist, I work in a couple of different programs, and I got to really use the power of these RPCs and being able to visualize them in the different platforms. So super excited to see it in SketchUp here. So with that, Corey, I'll let you get back into it.
Thank you. So SketchUp pulled up here from AVAIL. The same things, same situation will happen. Hopefully it'll actually be a little bit more seamless. Let's go back to the content library and grab, let's say, Photoshop file. If I double click on that, it'll open the file, that Photoshop file up directly inside of Photoshop. So those files accessible, so many different file types in here. Again, I'll just grab a URL. I'll talk about Mr. Cutout here in just a second, but I can grab a URL, and even in preview mode here, I can literally look at content from within that URL directly inside of AVAIL. And you'll see why this is important here a little bit further down the road. So I'll close this. So let's talk about the RPCs and assets, and I'll zoom out from RPC and just let's talk about 3D assets for just a second. Trying to get 3D assets into your BIM applications or even your DCCs can be challenging, right? Where do you get them from? What kind of assets do you use? What's a poly count? You know, what are the materials on these objects? Things like that. RPC technology is designed to help you democratize all those kind of sub-level, let's say complexities, if you will, that are part of your regular everyday processes, and help you take these assets, and when you invest time in building these assets, and store them in the RPC, store them in a channel like this, and basically have a single source of truth and location for that content that you're creating. So when it comes to the 3D assets that you want to use inside of, say, Revit or Rhino or SketchUp, a couple of things that you want to start thinking about, and as you prepare your library or as you think about the content needs you have, one of the first questions you should ask yourself or need to ask yourself is, what type of model do I need? And I'll say this from the RPC perspective because, or I'll ask this from the RPC perspective because the RPC can contain, let's say, a 2-dimensional RPC or a 3-dimensional RPC. And 2-dimensional RPCs can be used, I'll just highlight this one here, and this will actually show, I'll call it a problem at first, but I'll explain more. So the 2D RPCs can be great for, let's say, background shots or shots where you're not really close up to the model and don't need to see the level of detail. Let's say the hands or shoes and shoelaces on this character, you might not need to see that. This character might be able to be in your Revit file and, you know, 10 or 20 feet away from the camera, and you may not need to have a 3-dimensional asset. And a 2D asset would be fine. This particular asset here is a 2D asset. I'm showing this version of this here with the black background on it to point out that when you process an RPC that's a 2D RPC through our system, you're going to want to use a PNG file format, which has transparency built into it. I built this model here out of just a JPEG, which has no transparency. And so we end up with something that looks like this. And this is not a type of RPC that would be, or 3D model that would be useful for anyone really. So if I click on RPC here and sort, if I click on this asset here, this is the next evolution of this. This is where I'm using a PNG to create my RPC. And then you can see there's at least some backgrounds removed from this. And I can then spin around this character and start to see the next level problem that happens from the 2D RPCs, which is that they won't hold up when you start to try to look at them from different viewpoints, right? So you could possibly imagine, you know, using these 2D RPCs for larger crowds of people farther away from the camera. As an example, trees is another great example to use these 2D billboards type RPCs. But these are super lightweight, super efficient. You can find these PNGs virtually anywhere. You can look at a library like I was, like Mr. Cutout, as I was kind of pulling up earlier. have a subscription to Mr. Cutout, you can download any of these files, import them into our creation tools, and you'll have an RPC of this little family or that little couple or whatever within a couple clicks. Okay. Plenty of these resources out there. VizHopper is another good one. And you may even have your own sources. So I'll touch on this again. I'll cover this more in our next webinar up and coming, but with our iOS app, you can actually even just snap pictures from your phone of people, yourself, coworkers, or whatever, and build 2D asset, 2D RPCs literally on the fly. So I'll step back over to the RPCs here for a second. Again, differentiate between the 2D and the 3D assets. So 3D asset creation gets you in a world right now, which is really, really popular with the advent of Enscape, for instance, coming out over the last few years, and its popularity as a real-time engine, and people that are used to now not just rendering still pictures, but now they're used to walking through their models, right? And as you walk through your model, and if you had a bunch of 2D cardboard cutout RPC types, you'd see those paper thin transparency. It wouldn't look really well, right? It wouldn't show up well. So this model here is from one of our partners. It's was an FBX that we brought into our system and converted this into an RPC. And this file now, obviously, you can see, you can even look at this asset and plan. You can walk by this asset. You can yeah, whatever, look all around this asset and you see it in full 3D, right? The process of creating this is an import process. Our tools can import in FBX files, OBJ, USD files, USDZ, GLTF, GLB files. We can even import, you can even import RPCs that were already made, for instance, to recreate these assets, okay? So this particular file, just a few notes about standards with let's say 3D people. We try to help people with a texture size, mesh size, as these assets are produced and as you're publishing. When you buy assets from online and you need to get them into an RPC format, you'll be paying attention, hopefully, to, or you should be paying attention to the texture sizes that are coming along with the model and the size of the geometry or the poly count that you can get the model in from that particular vendor. A lot of vendors like Render People, Turbo Squid, Sketchfab, or whatever, they'll give you poly counts on the models that you're downloading. Just be aware, especially as you're going into a real-time engine like Enscape, that a person probably wants to be in the range of 9,000 to 20,000 triangles or something like that. You can go lower, you can go higher, but that's a pretty big range. But a good awareness of just knowing the range and why you would pick a low end or high end poly count. You want to pick a high end poly count if this character was a hero character and they're, say, closer to my camera or closer to a point of interest in my visualization project. If they were farther away, then you could definitely, again, either revert back to a 2D billboard as an example, or a lower poly count. The cool part about what I'm showing here with this 3D asset is that actually you can buy an asset, you can, let's say, import it in, get it into AVAIL through FOVEA and our other tools. Once it's in here and I'm in this viewer, I can actually even take a snapshot of this character and save this PNG out and index this character back into AVAIL, or create even a 2D billboard from this particular 3D asset. So even from the 3D data, I can create a 2D RPC if that seemed to be most fitting for my particular project. Okay. I'm using a person, a 3D people, a person as an example in this case, but this could be a tree, this could be a piece of furniture, this could be, you know, a car. It doesn't matter what the 3D data set is, the concepts are the same. But as the assets change, there are different variables involved, right? Car models that you might find online might be way more high poly than let's say this person is. You know, scan data, for instance, that you might get from your phone or from a provider. I see Michael Raphael on the call today, from Direct Dimensions and their team over there, for instance, and Joe. Nice to have you guys on today. You know, you could make take and make assets from full on scan data from Leica cameras and so on and so forth with, you know, in partnership with a company like Direct Dimensions, and make those assets into RPCs as well, through our tools. So 2D, 3D, be aware of those two types of asset types. Again, importing in and using PNGs to do your 2D assets, and then for 3D assets, getting used to file formats like FBX, USD, OBJ, GLTF, and GLB. Those are some of the heavy hitters that we use to be able to create these 3D assets. I'll hop over to SketchUp really quickly, just to kind of capitalize on the difference here in these assets. So I'm going to fire up Enscape and let that sit and start up on my other screen. I'll pull it over here in just a second. But those 3 RPCs that I was showing in AVAIL, they're all here. So here's a 2D cardboard cutout that was using the JPEG as an example, which is bad. But then the 2D cutout for this girl here, not bad. Again, if I'm looking at a model from a pretty far distance, that's going to be a pretty acceptable asset, right? And then our 3D RPC here is shown in a proxy mesh format inside of SketchUp, and I'll touch on proxy mesh here in just a second. But this is just a low fidelity mesh that we can add to SketchUp that ultimately is not causing a bottleneck with SketchUp for triangle count. So when we talk about a car or scan data, for instance, coming into this asset library through our tools, we don't want to throw a ton of triangles at a program like SketchUp as an example, because it could overburden the CAD package pretty quickly. Okay, and not to mention that it can also slow down your visualization process. So here's the Enscape render or session, I should say. And if I, you know, zoom around these guys, you'll see a couple things. Obviously, again, the failure of the JPEG, that's cool, we get that. But then if you look at the 2D cutout in the middle of this, halfway, again, halfway acceptable from a distance would be great, but obviously when I get up in the air, it fails. But you see the 3D RPC, the 3D asset actually stays intact, and you can see it in its full 3D format, right? One other thing you'll notice here is this 2D asset inside of SketchUp and Enscape. As I rotate this camera around, that asset continues to rotate around with the camera. That's a setting that you can disable and not allow that cardboard cutout to rotate, but it can be looked at as a feature depending on you know, how you what your preference is with the billboard. Some you want to turn off, some you can turn that feature off individually for each asset, and you might want some that are actually rotating with your camera. All right, skip back over to AVAIL here and jump out. So I mentioned a couple other file types. I want to kind of mention where you can get some of these assets. All right, SketchUp 3D Warehouse, as an example, is a great resource for people to grab models from. People come in here and use these all the time in SketchUp. our platform will allow SketchUp users to take data or models from 3D Warehouse, process those models, democratize those files, get them into RPC format, and literally allow architects and designers using, let's say, Rhino or Revit to import in those models that the designer might be using in SketchUp, and use those same exact models inside of Revit or Rhino in very short order. It's just a few clicks away from getting those models into the R format. Sketchfab, another great one. You can download models from Sketchfab and process those through our tools. And another good one is TurboSquid. So a lot of complexities involved with the TurboSquid platform versus, I'll say, Sketchfab and 3D Warehouse. And reason for that is that TurboSquid has just so many different file types that they support, other, outside of the Sketchfab and 3D Warehouse world, like Maya files and Softimage files and things like. There's definitely some higher end DCC applications that there's content in here for. Those assets still normally, though, will get written out into an FBX file format or even an OBJ as part of your TurboSquid purchase. And those OBJs and FBXs can be brought into our tools. Okay. So covered the different vendors and some of those concepts. Want to now,
Hey, Corey, I wanted to also, for anyone who's also brand new to this, can you show the RPC? Like ArchVision also has a curated selection of these assets as well that are ready to go. So I just wanted, if you don't mind, will you showcase that, just because I know that it's a very powerful thing to have easy access to the stuff already.
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of a normal ArchVision subscription, or your base ArchVision subscription, you'll get content in a library already ready for you to consume and use. Couple of these channels already sitting here in AVAIL, our RPC Prime channel, for instance, already has content that we've already built and ready for you to consume and use. So I mentioned like importing in RPCs into our tools. You can use these assets and import them into our tools and customize these assets as well. All right, so aircrafts and people and some furniture in our channel. If I go back out to look at, let's say, render people, which is much more focused on just people, obviously, there are over 3,300 assets in here, all managed content already here. Using the keys, the tags and filters here, I can, find construction workers in a couple clicks. And these are all download, drag and drop, and ready to go. I'll talk a little bit about the channel structure for a second here, because we say one content, one library, one content library, any platform. These channels, as you're putting your content in these channels, or if you're using content from our marketplace channel, like this render people channel, these channels are all clouds. This channel in particular is cloud content. So all these assets are stored in our cloud, and they have to come down. They have to come down to your local machine or your local environment. So if you're in a team environment, you'll want to set these channels up so that this content is downloaded to a shared network location, so that your entire team has access to the shared library. So the library starts as a single source. To make it a single source of truth internally, you're going to want to make sure that you look at the channel details of in the channel in AVAIL, and you can set the central cache location here. Right now, this is just set up to my desktop, so I'm only sharing it to I'm only storing these on my C drive, but this could be network location, and then anytime anyone on my team downloads the content from this channel, it'll get stored in that location. Let's also talk about how do people get access to these libraries, and what's it take to administer and share out this content. So right now, I'm an AVAIL administrator on my team. So let's say subscribe to ArchVision. I'm the one that's making sure the content is online and ready to share with our users. And up here on the upper right hand corner of this channel, if I click on edit shared users, this is where I can add users to my channel. So if I have a team of Revit users or team of artists that are working in 3 Studio Max or whatever, I can add people to this channel, and this is basically how I'm going to start sharing this channel out with teams across my company. Okay. And once the person, the team member gets access to this, it'll look exactly like we're looking at it here. They'll see the channel cards, they'll be able to open up the content, and then they'll be able to search and find the assets that they need in AVAIL, and download and place them in their CAD package, their BIM package. These assets, I'll touch on this here. These assets are all preview ready. So if I select this asset in this channel, if I want to just double check to see what this fellow looks like in 3D, might take a second here for him to load up, but we'll load the model up and you'll be able to just preview, just check to make sure he has the look and the feel that you might want him to have in your scene. You could say download and then just drag and drop and place that into SketchUp, Rhino, or Revit. Another great feature, just as far as you're building up these libraries, and in this particular case with this marketplace channel, I can't edit the tags on this marketplace content. Because this is a marketplace channel, it's basically, essentially, I'll say it's read only. ArchVision is providing the content in this channel. You're not able to add content into this channel, but what you can do with this content is you can download a piece of content, and I can right click over this piece of content and I can add this to another channel. So if I have a firm-wide channel of content that I'm managing, I can add this piece of content to, let's say, my one content any platform library, and I can click on copy, and that just ran this quick job, and I can go back to my channel of content that I made for this particular presentation today. And once I'm in here, you'll see that asset is sitting here in my library. So if this was a firm-wide library, boom, I've curated a piece of content from this marketplace collection, and I've delivered it to a specific channel. And this could be a specific channel for a project. In this case, it's a specific channel for this presentation that I'm doing today. Okay, so that piece of content can be shared across multiple channels inside the company. So that's a little bit about our marketplace content and how those marketplace channels are a bit different than the original channel of content that I was showing you here. Let's touch on, we're about at the halfway point. So I want to now touch on our FOVEA platform a little bit, and then leave some time for Q&A. I wanted to give you all the kind of this foundation and awareness about AVAIL and some of the, polygon limitation or counts and file formats and things like that, because the tool that you're going to be using to do all this will be FOVEA. Okay, FOVEA is a tool, and I'm actually going to open it up here directly in AVAIL, just to show you all first that this is a web URL. If I double click on this, I'm going to open up FOVEA from the web view, and this will open up the content that I've created through my account, and you'll see some of the similar similar thumbnails that we were looking at in AVAIL as an example. So I made these three pieces of content for the presentation. These three pieces of content are sitting and living back in this channel. If I close FOVEA, they're living, sitting right here in this channel, right? I already have them inside of my AVAIL platform, and I can drag and drop these into my BIM application. If I wanted to, and I'm not going to promote this, but I will just bring it up and say, if you have project teams that aren't using AVAIL, they can use assets from our FOVEA application that are that can be downloaded directly from FOVEA in an unmanaged state. Again, don't want to promote that, but you can bring down, as you can see, a handful of different types of file formats of this asset that I've created. Okay, so you'll see the RPC VR scene file. That's a V-Ray file. Datasmith for the Enscape, or sorry, for the Epic Games ecosystem. GLTF for other like a NVIDIA Omniverse ecosystem, and pure Enscape asset. Those are all here and readily available. In our next webinar, I'll get into the weeds a bit more on FOVEA, why, how it works, and get really in more detail and into what you can do with it and what you can't do with it. But I want to come back to AVAIL here and go to my channels list, and I want to point out another channel here, which is our integration between our FOVEA tool and AVAIL. If I double click on this, this opens up a view, and it's split left to right. On the left side, I have, I'll say, content. And on the right side, you're going to see now FOVEA pop up in here. Okay. This is what we call a lens in AVAIL, essentially a plugin. It's a little icon over here on the right-hand side. If I click on preview, this will go into preview mode. I don't have any content selected, so I'm not seeing a preview at the moment. But if I, let's say, go to this RPC block and click on a piece of content, you'll see it loads in here. Very similar to the channel that we were originally looking at, and very similar to the selection and look at the preview of the piece of content. Then if I go back and click on the FOVEA lens here, this will again open up FOVEA here. Why is this here? What's going on? What are we doing with it? What is this doing here? I will zoom out back to these cards here, and I will click on GLB for just a second. And I will actually go down to the girl I made this morning. Let's say she's here. And what I will do now is I've downloaded that piece of content. I've downloaded her as a GLB file, and I'm placing this GLB file over into our FOVEA lens here in AVAIL. I now have full reign now of authoring and republishing this piece of content. I'll just give a super simple example right now of why this is cool and important and very valuable. Again, this is a 2D cutout. If I select this asset, I can go to my materials on this asset, and you'll see there's a little swatch down here for the texture. Imagine for a second that project architect says, I want an asset here, but I don't want it to show this pink shirt as an example. I would rather just have a literally like foam core looking or clay looking model for this asset. I can remove this texture from here and get bad example probably, but I can get, in this case, representation of the image that was cut out, or the size of the image that was cut out. If I was doing this with a different image, I could still get the cutout, and keep the texture, the material gray. So I can use an opacity map, enable the opacity map on this to get that cutout on this particular object. Okay. I can actually take another model here and say, let's use this girl here as an example. I can place her in here, and she's in full 3D. So this is another asset coming in as a GLB file. I can now take and say customize her shirt, or maybe make her taller or something like that. And then I can go on publish option here, and I could say one content as a name for this. We'll say girl, girl category. I'll select my category. This is where the metadata comes in that we're seeing in AVAIL, and I'll show that in just a second. And I can say webinar, and the proxy type in this case, I'll choose billboard, and I can choose to downscale her texture, and do mesh simplification at this point if I wanted to. So depending on where the asset comes from, if you know that you're getting that model from Turbo Squid as an example, and it has a super high res texture, you're going to want to downsample that if you know you're going to end up rendering this asset in Enscape as an example. So I could go ahead and say, set that down to 1K texture map and say mesh simplification. In this case, this asset's at 35,000 triangles. I could bring that down to say something lower, like around 9,000. This is targeted. Poly count, we may not hit exactly that, but we're going to do the best we can to hit that triangle count. And now I can hit publish new. So this is going to take that job that I'm running and send it up to our cloud and process this asset. While this asset is processing, I will jump back over to our FOVEA channel and talk about this content, this channel, I should say, as a bigger, broader channel.
And Corey, while you're also kind of talking about the larger picture and the larger, like the higher overview, we actually have a question about how well does this workflow work between ArchVision, Rhino, and V-Ray. So I know we covered a lot of this of like, how does this actually get visualized in those programs in the last webinar? And I'm happy to share that digital event with you, Marcel. But I also just want to put that question out there as you're starting to kind of talk about this, because I think this would fit well into like understanding how does this asset then get used in those different platforms?
That's a great question. While I continue to show some stuff, I'm going to fire up Rhino and the let me just double check something. I'm going to do something on the fly here. Give me just a second.
All good. I didn't mean to interrupt your train of thought there, but
it's all good. These should be casual and friendly. It's all good.
Yeah, and we actually have another poll for our viewers as well. So once again, please answer these. These really help us understand which programs you are visualizing. We know that there are different visualization solutions for all different types. And I think that is extremely powerful to use tools like this. I know I've been in many situations where someone's working in 2D while someone else is in 3D, but they need to have the same asset. They're doing a project for a school that needs to have all one color shirts. So being able to see Corey, you do this here live in this event is amazing. And I hope people understand how great it is for collaboration for teams to be able to have this kind of centralized, assets, and also even the like rotating and taking the snapshot of those 3D assets. That's huge. Like being able to kind of manipulate that asset and use it for your workflow is great. But with that, I'll give it back to you, Corey.
I'm letting Rhino start up on the other screen. I'm not 100% sure if I have honestly the latest RPC plugin in Rhino, but Marcel, if you can just maybe close one eye and pretend SketchUp here is Rhino. So these RPCs, these assets are here. I did start this Enscape up earlier. If I use V-Ray for SketchUp as an example and just fire up V-Ray for SketchUp, let's see here, probably not getting a license demo. Let me do it this way, because I know I have this working on this other screen. Let me just make sure this is.
And speaking of licenses, so Marcel has another question. So if the question is, if I have downloaded or purchased data, do they remain my property?
If you're creating content from the FOVEA platform, it's your property, yes. The content coming from our channel in the marketplace is obviously our property, and or the property from one of our vendors, that's licensed content, and you'll need an active subscription for that content to render. All right, Marcel, I apologize. I will answer it with words as opposed to visuals. V-Ray will render these assets, I promise. I am for some reason not getting my V-Ray license at the moment. I think I accidentally turned it off before this webinar, but they will render with V-Ray. You also have the choice, and this is, I can segue into the higher level channel structure and what's happening here by way of your question, because down here on the lower right hand corner of this FOVEA channel, you'll see VR scene file, VR scene. These are assets. These are all V-Ray ready assets. You could use these assets with V-Ray without using our RPC file format. We create the V-Ray ready file as part of the publishing process. So the same girl that I was showing earlier, walking around, here she is, and the same ones down here. She lives, those files live even as a file format in this channel. And she's V-Ray ready. So rest assured, even if the RPC won't render with V-Ray for one reason or another, you have a digital twin of that asset ready to go that you could import into any V-Ray version or Vantage or virtually any V-Ray product as a V-Ray scene file. Okay.
And yeah, and so Marcel's also asking like whether this is possible. So they're thinking about going to Enscape Rhino. Is it easy to swap ArchVision V-Ray Enscape? I feel like a lot of these questions can be answered with our last digital event. So we will send you the video for that. This is going to give you more detailed information and show you exactly how those are being rendered. But Corey, do you want to add on anything to that specific question?
I'll just say, if you're constantly or wanting to switch between renderers, if that's something that's of interest and that's in your tool set, or even within your own office, if your project team is switching between Revit and Rhino or using Revit and SketchUp on the same project, the RPC is your single source of truth piece of content. You'll want to use RPCs and not the Enscape, let's say not the V-Ray asset or not the Enscape asset. You could use those assets from our FOVEA publishing, but I would tell you and promise that you'll have better luck with the RPCs over time, because if you place an Enscape asset in your SketchUp scene and from our library and expect a V-Ray artist to be able to render it, it will work through Chaos's ecosystem, but if you were expecting that Enscape asset to render with Twinmotion, as an example, it's not going to work. So if you were switching between rendering engines, the chances of your pure, I call them pure assets. So a pure Enscape asset or a pure V-Ray asset, they'll work inside the Chaos ecosystem, but they may not work outside of that. We can't guarantee that, right? So that's why we make the Datasmith version, if you will, for a Twinmotion user base or Epic Games user base. But the real value in the RPC is use it and the renders will consume it, period. Okay. So I got a chance to dive into that V-Ray scene file format, but what I want to do now is actually expose something which is the real, I'll call it the truth behind what we're doing. And it's not to say that I'm lying to you about anything at the moment, but I'm going to hide key cards in this channel. And once I hide key cards in this channel, you're going to see I have a ton of content inside of this channel. Okay. You'll see the same image over and over and over again. And the question is, why am I seeing all that? Right. Well, this is your one library, right? In fact, this one asset, let's say here with the same version number, V201 all the way down, there's 15, 16 copies of this, depending on how many versions we produce. I'll explain that in a second. It's all from the same data set. As soon as I turn on those key cards, I'm showing you, I'm basically showing you the content in a managed state. So what that means is down here at the bottom, you'll see we have application list. We have category, subcategory, type, these things. If I was looking at, let's say, Rhino as my program of choice at the moment, and I was looking for content specifically for Rhino, I could click on and filter by Rhino. And once I filter here, we have this all pre-curated for you and managed so that when you publish a model, we add the tags, the appropriate tags to all the content. You'll see I have it Rhino selected. It's filtering for Rhino content. In Rhino, I have the option to use these types of file formats down below. So I can use an FBX file, an OBJ file, an RPC file, or I can import a V-Ray scene file into V-Ray if you're using V-Ray in Rhino. Okay, so we help you kind of start to kind of figure out which file format you want to use in your particular use case or your project. So if I click on RPC, that's going to now drill down into Rhino and basically all RPCs, because ultimately everything that's an RPC is ready for Rhino because we have a plugin for Rhino. Okay. So these are all the RPCs. We exported out the girl earlier through the FOVEA plugin lens in AVAIL. She's sitting here. She's ready to go. She's in my library automatically placed there and ready for me to consume wherever I want to consume her.
So, hey, Corey, I just want to interrupt for a moment as we are about to get to the hour. I just want to say if you have any questions, we are monitoring the questions, so feel free to pop any in there. I guess I have a question in reference to kind of that girl that you just spoke about. So earlier you were talking a little bit about polygons, and then you had also mentioned, you know, file size of any bitmaps or any of the visuals there. Are there any rules of thumbs that people should be, you know, cautious about? Should people be using power of 2 pixel ratios for that, or any guidance there? Or yeah, happy to hear your thoughts on that.
I'll definitely say power 2 is preferable from our standpoint, but again, I'll kind of zoom out to, you know, and use one example. I mentioned scan data. So our iOS app, for instance, these assets, these cakes here are a good example of why you want to be aware of poly count and texture size. So let me just do show and tell through this really quickly. I'll go back to my file here, go to GLB and go to the cake, open up the lens, and I'll go to actually really doesn't matter which one of these I pull in. FOVEA will load up. This is the original data coming directly from our iOS app. I can tell you, I wouldn't want to consume this asset in Enscape by itself right out of the gate without doing some processing on it. But the capture originally, I'm going to capture that at the highest fidelity that I can possibly capture it relative to the device that I'm capturing the data. Okay, so if I pop this cake in here, it's here. This would be a perfectly fine little asset to go and put in my little kitchen rendering that I have for a residential project that I might be working on as an example. But what's not okay about this is if I went to publish this and we looked at the mesh size on here, this is 442,000 triangles in this model. If I put this cake on a table and tried to render this with Enscape, we'd cause Enscape a little bit of heartache. Okay, so when you're making these assets and preparing them, my simple answer is know where you're going to go with the asset and choose your level of optimization accordingly. Okay, so when you want to use real-time assets, you're going to want to make sure that poly count is low as possible. All right, that's changing a little bit as things are going on in the world these days with Lumen, for instance, and a couple other advanced tools in the Epic ecosystem. Global illumination is becoming easier to do in those tools. Sam, what's the
Nanite?
Yeah, nanite, sorry.
Nanite, yeah.
Like nanite, for instance, in the Epic system, maybe polygons are less something you have to think about. But as you're working day to day these days inside of let's say Enscape, you got to pay attention to what you're doing with the polys, and you don't want to push those down as low as possible.
Absolutely. I would say it's just great protocol for all designers, artists, creators, managers to make sure that you're being thoughtful and being smart about how you create these assets. And it's going to make a huge difference. Like something as far as making sure that has a lower poly count early is going to save so much time later when you're on a deadline trying to get something out the door and whatever platform you're having is struggling a little bit just because of the poly count there. So I think that's great. We do have another question here, and then I know we have just a few more minutes to the end. So Marcel asks, how do you see the future of small meshes, billboards, or chaos cosmos?
Well, great question. I'll tell you what we do, and we'll see what the future is. But what as this cake example, we try to capture and set the bar high with what the quality is from the get-go. All right, so when you're working with data sets from, let's say, Turbo Squid or whatever, we try to we give you the platform to make the original asset as pure and as high fidelity as possible from the get-go. And the reason for that is that I believe that polygons won't matter at some point in time. They just won't. Whether that's 5 years down the road or 10 years, it won't matter. So as you're building your library today, think about it for the future and prepare your data set to be as high fidelity as possible, and then downsample for what you need today, if that's a fair question. So that would be my simple answer. Like, start with the highest fidelity that you can and then downsample from there, just like you would be looking at, let's say, using imagery for web graphics or print graphics. You want to capture and make your graphics as high fidelity, high res as possible, and then downsample them for web use. So we're working on some things that will automate some of these processes on our side, so that an RPC of this cake, for instance, can have multiple LODs built into it, as an example. So Enscape, when it reads this particular RPC, would automatically grab and consume the most optimized piece of content without you even having to optimize it at all yourself. Okay.
I totally agree with that. Sorry to interrupt, Corey. I totally agree with that. I think that's a great rule of thumb moving forward. And there were a couple of questions about Vantage and chaos. And so I do want to note that we will have a digital event covering chaos. So if you're interested in this or in the FOVEA, once again, that's July 24th. Please stay tuned with our social media, with our emails. We are sharing more information in the next few weeks about this. So hopefully we can answer some more questions for you at that time. Corey, I know we are at the hour right now. Do you have any additional words or any closing statements that you would like to add in here?
Yeah, I'd just like to add one more thing, and that is, the power of what we're building here is really to take these assets and build your library out so that you're making that one library for yourself that is going to live long down the road. And so with the libraries that ship with most of the engines that are coming out today, we have to understand that those libraries of content are suitable for those particular applications and for those use cases. And those platforms may or may not be around, or may or may not be used in your environment down the road. So what happens to those assets that you place in your projects? With our platform and what we're doing with our content, and us trying to maintain a democratized and an agnostic approach to the content, we're trying to give you a platform that you can invest yourselves in, create the content, and make sure that you're not going to lose out on what you've spent time and money on making now in the future.
Very well said, Corey. That was, I think, a great kind of wrap up of everything that you've discussed here and kind of talked about longevity of what happens in the future as all of these pipelines are continuing to evolve. So I think that's a great wrap up for this. I want to thank everyone for taking the time to be here with us today. I hope that you were able to learn something new or take something back to your team and help improve some of your workflows. Once again, we will be doing many of these throughout this season, so please stay tuned. Thank you so much for joining us. And with that, we will say farewell. So thank you, everyone.